for book value, which in today's world is little less than what companies are really worth. Very few companies are worth only book value. There's some intrinsic value called goodwill that goes on top of it. He said, but you're going to have to give something up. I'm waiting for, what is that? He said, you are going to disavow any claim to mine and your mother's estate. I said, well, let me get that straight. I'm going to buy the company from you over time, and you're going to take all that money and then you're going to pass it out to my 3 sisters. He said, you got it, you smart kid. And I said, I'll take that deal. I think that's a hell of a deal. Because the hardest part in business isn't going from $30 million a year in volume to $1.6 billion. The hardest part's that first $30 million. That is harder than anything that I would have ever had to do. So that was my first lesson. Number 1, know yourself, work hard, and when you see that opportunity, go for it. And that old equation, when preparation meets opportunity, you never know when that's going to come. You got to strike. So we were then able to take that, and now I'm in charge of Walbridge. And here's the beautiful thing about taking a company that had an incredible history. Walbridge celebrated its 100th year anniversary today. Not today, this year. 100 years. I'm the 7th owner and CEO. So we decided in the last year, how do we celebrate? How do we celebrate that 100-year success? What can we learn? What can we set forward so the next 100 years has the same opportunity as I had in 1975? And so we decided to write a book. So we started interviewing authors and stuff, and everybody wanted to go, oh, you got this 7,500 projects they've done, starting with the Hoover Dam. And we said, no, we don't want to do it about projects. We want to do it about the people. What is it about the people? What was in the water that allowed us to go for 100 years? And we learned 3 important lessons of why it allowed us to survive for that 100 years. The first is that we appreciated and built on our institutional memory. That institutional memory is embodied in all you people. It's embodied in your systems. It's embodied in your culture. You have to dissect it, understand it, adopt it, embrace it, and then go with it. So that institutional memory is so important. The deeper the company, the older the company, the more of it that you have, and the more of it you can look back and say, what made us successful? The second thing is what I call selfless leadership. Now this isn't you can see this in a million ways, but I'm going to give you just one example. And that example is if we've had 7 CEOs and 7 different owners, that means the company got sold 7 times. And here's the key. There was a saying, it's in the minutes of the meeting back in the 30s, leave a little on the table for the next guy. What does that mean? Well, that means is when we go to sell the company, you don't have to extract the absolute highest price that you can possibly get. That you have an obligation in both the future and the past to leave a little on the table for the next guy. That means sell the company to the guys that are inside for just a little bit less than what you might sell it to some competitor or to Wall Street.
You don't use that rule when you're selling real estate.
That's true.
I'm sorry.
Steve, I never wanted a good deal to get away. So you have to know when to hold them and when to fold them. That, leaving a little bit on the table for the next guy, especially if it comes to the top, permeates the whole organization. I mean, I can only imagine the battle for commissions in an organization like this. Maybe it's all prescribed very cleanly, but maybe it's not. It's not in law firms. Okay? And that ability to work as a team, rather than saying it's all about me, it's the first step to having team. Okay? The next thing, and the final thing that we saw, was this idea around innovation. Now, when you talk about innovation, everybody thinks that innovation is all about investing in inventing the next iPhone or the equivalent of it. But that's not the kind of innovation I'm talking about. That's not the kind of innovation that kept Walgreens relevant for 100 years. The kind of innovation I'm talking about is I see 120 people, sitting in this room. The kind of innovation I'm talking about is an idea that you and you and you will come up with this year that we can implement. And if everybody in this room came up with one idea, that means you would be changing 120 things a year. And over 10 years, you'd be changing 1,000 things. And that's the kind of innovation that keeps your organization relevant, world-class, and the best a customer can have. And you add those three things together, the institutional memory, that includes the reputation. How important is reputation? It includes this selfless leadership, team coming straight from the top. It includes this innovation, adaptation to change. It's so important. And one little postscript on innovation. Innovation today requires incredible knowledge, skill, and experience. You know, back at the time of Christ, it took 1,000 years for knowledge in the world to double. So if you were a carpenter and you participated in building the manger, you would go your entire career and not see one single change in how you did your job. You'd use the same design, the same wood, the same tools, the same fastening. The whole thing is the same, and you go through your life, and I lived 50 years back then, so you maybe work 20 or 30 years, and you pass it on to your son. And he wouldn't see any change, and it'd take 20 generations, 25 generations, just to double the amount of knowledge that the world has. Do you know how much it takes today to double the amount of knowledge in the world? Does anybody have a clue? 12 months. Not 12 years. 12 months. The amount, and there are some industries, medical advances, computer technology, that they're doubling every 6 months. So how could you possibly innovate anything if you didn't stay current with what's going on in the world and what's going on in your company? So that's the kind of culture that Walgreens has. We drive this home, we spend money on it, and we're hoping that we can make that next 100 years. I won't be here for it, but I'm hoping the next guy who's speaking to a group like you in 2116 can say, you know, those guys back 100 years ago, they set the pathway for us. And to me, that would be success. Now, one last thing about Walgreens, and we'll get into politics. And that one last thing is, we created a risk model. This didn't come along from me until 1983-84. We bought out our biggest competitor. The name of the company was Darren Armstrong. At the time, Walgreens was doing $100 million worth of work. They were doing $400 million worth of work, and we wanted to buy them to get access to markets, and the thing worked. We bought. Once we got inside, we were shocked. They were bankrupt. They were bankrupt, and we said, oh my gosh, look at this, they're bankrupt. Well, the bonding company, we retraded them. No problem on the financial part of it. We got in there, and we noticed three things. That they still had a lot of jobs that they were making money. And then they had this group of jobs that they were like making money on some of them and losing money on other ones. And then they had this whole group of jobs that they were losing money. And it became apparent to anybody who's in the business that had the expertise. Just apply this to yourself. You're all experts here. We noticed there were three things, three variables that were causing them to have bad performance. Variable number one, who's the owner? Had they ever worked for that owner before? Variable number two, where were they building this? Was it in Detroit, Muskegon, Miami, Guam? Where? And variable number three was, what kind of construction were they actually building? And here's what we found out. On the jobs where they always make money, same owner had built hundreds of those things before and did it in a geographic location where they had worked in the past. They made money on every single job. Go to all the way to being off the record anymore. Okay? I gave a speech to the Builders Exchange about 3 or 4 years ago, and somebody called me up and they said, you know, your speech is on the internet. Some guy had sat in the front row with his iPhone, taped the whole thing and put it on the internet. So I'm struggling here, and I figure out one of the things I can do, I said, I know what to do. Because I don't agree with Donald Trump on some of his issues. I'm going to say, unless I have an hour with Donald Trump, I'm going to say no. How can I go out and ask people for millions of dollars in contributions if I can't say, I know the guy? So he said, well, is that your condition? I said, no, I have 6 or 7 more. I said, well, list them for me. And I did. He said, I think we could live with your conditions. Let me get back to you tomorrow. Next day he calls up and he said, I talked to Donald. And he can see you on the 23rd of June in Chicago at the Trump Hotel in Chicago at 10 o'clock in the morning for half an hour. Can you make it? And I said, can I bring my wife? And they said, yes. I said, I can make it. So now, leading up to that meeting, I'm thinking to myself, what kind of a guy is Donald Trump? I only seen him on television. And I hear all of his press reports about what a bad guy he is. Braggadocio, loudmouth, egotistical, whatever else you might want to say. So my wife and I get to the hotel at 9:30 in the morning. His staff is there waiting for us to usher this little table. I said, would you like to have breakfast? We said, of course. We sat down and had breakfast. It took about 15 minutes. And they said, well, let's go up to this conference room. We go up to the conference room, and we get there about 9:45. They said, Mr. Trump will be in at 10 o'clock. I sit down, put my computer out, figure it's going to be till 10 o'clock or maybe 10:15 because politicians are never on time. And they never want to give you any more time than they actually contracted for. So we've got a half an hour, we're going to get maybe 30 minutes and 00 seconds. And the next thing you know, before I can blink an eye, he walks in the room, 15 minutes early. And he walks right up over to me and shakes my hand, and he and myself and my wife and Eric sit down at this little small card table. There's 4 people. Nobody else is in the room. And he says, happy to meet you. He's my wife, very friendly, and we sit down and we start talking. And the first impression I have is that this guy is very soft-spoken. He's nothing like me, okay? A very soft-spoken guy, and for the entire hour, by the way, we spent the whole hour together, he was soft-spoken the entire time. Number 2, the issue that I was concerned about is I build auto plants all over the world. That's my business. And I didn't like what he was saying about my customers, Ford and General Motors, and so I was going to take him on and say, you're all wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. So I said that. And he said, rather than getting argumentative, he looked at me and he said, and by the way, he was excellent listener. Very good listener. He looked at me. You can tell when somebody's listening. I can tell right now you guys are listening. There's nobody's head just going like this, and I don't see too many people with their head in their lap and they got that greenish glow coming off their face. So I can tell you he was a good listener. And I said, you're wrong on the auto policy. Your 35% tariff on bringing cars back to the United States is not going to work. You're never going to get it passed out of Congress, and even if you did, you just start the Great Depression around the world all over again. That's what started the Great Depression in the 20s and 30s. So he said to me, well, tell me why. I did. I said, it's regulations. You can build a paint shop in Mexico in 18 months. It takes 3 years in the United States. You have to get every permit in the world. It takes 20 months to get an air quality permit. That's just one of 20 permits you need. I said, number 2, it's the trade pacts. Mexico has 40 free trade pacts with virtually every country in the world that buys cars. They're not building those cars in Mexico to send them back to the United States, although some of them are. They're building those cars in Mexico because they can send them to 40 countries tariff-free. The United States can only send it to 11 countries, not 40. We're 29 trade pacts behind Mexico. And I said, and the third reason is the UAW. I said, it's not the wage. It's the ability to keep on introducing new technology, new productivity. And he sat back and he said, you're the first person who's ever come and explained it that way to me. The first person. He said, I think you and I can work together. So we sort of left. We left our ways. We had a lot more conversations with that. He's a gentleman the whole time. And I walked out of there with my wife, and on the way back to Detroit, I said to my wife, who's the real Donald Trump? Seriously, who is the real Donald Trump? Was that all an act to sort of get me to come on his team? Or is the real Donald Trump this guy you see on TV that's mocking, that whole thing, which is basically very disgusting? Who is the real guy? I don't think we know. And some of us are gonna say, I'm not willing to take a chance that the real guy is the guy that John Rakota saw, or the real guy is this guy that you see on TV. And to a large extent, I think the same thing, the same problem is with Hillary. I'm sure people who have met Hillary privately come away from that meeting and say exactly the same thing that John Rakota is saying about Donald Trump. She is smart, she is honest, she is this, she is that, this is all fabricated. And then you got this other side that you see in public, and other than a few people in the world, nobody knows it. So this is one giant crap game, and we just hope that we roll the right dice come November 7th. So I have a couple notes here, and I'll conclude by this.